Hi, Sarko. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well, Chris.
Yeah, good to see you, brother.
It's great to see you. I'm very happy to be here with you.
All right. Well, first of all, just thanks so much for taking the time to make this recording because if we're watching this in London, that means your future self is in the air somewhere traveling. So we really appreciate you taking the time to record this because I just think it's really important for our audience in London to hear about your amazing story and the kind of vital and innovative work you're doing over there in policing and beyond. So I don't know what my future self or whoever's introducing this segment has said, but just in case we forgot to do any introductions, could you just give yourselves a quick introduction? Now, you're a serving police lieutenant, right? But that's not all you are, right? It's more than that.
Sure. Yeah. I can sum it up. I am working at the rank of police lieutenant in my community. I'm also a psychotherapist. I primarily work with adults, quarter
Okay.
time, I say, nights and weekends. And I sit at the public health department right now, helping lead a multidisciplinary team of helpers, of which I have a patrol officer assigned to me, doing a particular type of policing that I think we're going to hopefully touch upon
Yeah.
today.
Well, that's right. We'll get on to that. But you're also a trained MDMA therapist, is that right?
I am. I am,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
I do. I have done psychedelic assisted psychotherapy with ketamine,
Okay.
working with a vet and working with a retired police officer. Yeah.
And would I be right in thinking that you're the only trained serving police officer who is a trained MDMA therapist? Would that be right? Or unique? I mean, we're all unique, but
Of course, we'd have to confirm such a statement somehow, but I'd feel pretty confident in thinking I
yeah,
might be. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I might
yeah.
be. I'm also, I think, probably one of the only working police officers right now who has the CARC credential,
Which is
possibly in the nation in America, which is the Certified Addiction Recovery Coach credential. It's a new credential in Massachusetts.
okay. Fascinating. That sounds
Yeah.
great. So multi-talented man doing amazing work. So let's start off on this journey, and we'll try and get your story. So obviously, you weren't always a police officer, and your route into policing is probably maybe not so traditional. So would you take us through a little bit of your journey into how you ended up in the police?
Sure, sure. I'm going to try to hold on to and remember telling you about the thought. I had a particular thought that helped drive a lot of things. But,
Okay.
in my undergraduate days in Boston, I was studying psychology, and the heavily behavioral program that I was in at Northeastern University wasn't giving my soul what it needed. I found
Okay.
myself taking a lot of courses in philosophy and religion, and that it became so big, it was almost like not really intentional. I ended up graduating with a philosophy and religion degree and a huge minor in psychology.
Okay.
So I bring that up because I was always driven with ideas around why are we here, what are
Okay.
we supposed to do, what's the meaning of life,
Meaning,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those types of things.
Yeah. It's a
Um,
sort of unusual mindset for a police officer to start with, right?
Um,
You
I,
might think.
I think so. I mean, just because my education background and the way I think seems to be a little different. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we need people thinking differently. So you've done your degree, but whilst you're doing your degree, you also do some other work in Boston, right?
Yeah, I was. Northeastern University is a co-op school. That means that you go to school in quarters and you take quarter breaks to work. They help you
Okay.
build your resume. And the co-op coordinator for me was like, it's time for you to pick where you're going to work. What are you going to do? And when I looked through the binder at the time, there was this binder where you search for jobs. There wasn't anything that really resonated. And I said, listen, could I have my co-op be working security in the nightclubs in Boston?
Oh, wow.
Uh,
Okay.
and he kind of looked at me like that's not very traditional. And I said, look, my major's turning into philosophy, right?
Yeah.
And my background and interest is I had a major background in martial arts at the time,
Okay.
and I was drawn to that particular scene as a helper,
Yeah.
and he allowed it. He allowed it. So that started like a 10-year journey in keeping people safe
Okay.
in the
And is that
nightclub
how long you
scene.
worked the doors for 10 years?
So yeah. I mean, it wasn't just the doors. I started inside, and
Okay.
then I did every imaginable position except for the DJ booth, and that's
Okay. Right.
you know what
Well,
I
you know, it's
mean,
still time.
right? Yeah. I like that. I like that. Absolutely. It did. It turned into a 10-year thing, and that's where I fell in love with people being able to be in a safe environment and express their authentic selves.
Oh, nice. Okay. So I think I remember hearing that you were, that was in a kind of a period where nightclub changed in terms of what people were doing and how people were acting. Do you
Yeah.
want to talk about that a little bit?
I do, absolutely. Yeah, I came in. I like to say it as I came in at the tail end of um, highly potent stimulants and alcohol,
Okay.
and there seemed to be a switchover, and it was in the '90s. So that's when this street drug ecstasy hit the scene,
Okay.
right? And what I had in my mind related to that was people basically being at these venues, looking at each other like they're enemies. Okay,
That's what you used to.
that, that's what we started at,
Yeah.
and this shift it was so profound, it was so drastic, to people welcoming each other to the venues,
Yeah.
gathering in circles, holding hands, hugging, and dancing to the same rhythm of the music.
It must have been quite stark to see that transformation, to see what's happened here. What's going on? Why aren't they just staring each other out? And now they're,
It, it was.
yeah,
It was. Yeah. And so I think this is important because I had that direct experience in me,
yeah.
when I became a police officer, right?
You could see that, this is not evil. This doesn't make people evil. It doesn't send them mad. It seems to make them enjoy each other's company a bit more. Well, let's hold on to that thought. So you did the doors, and then went on to join the police. And it sounds like you always had an idea that when you were going to go into the police, you wanted to maybe to do it differently.
Yeah, so let me touch upon that thought. I think this will be a great place to inject that, right? So I was compelled. And I've noticed that with hindsight, compelled to step in and help people calm down, step in and prevent warring parties from hurting themselves. And I think that's tied into some of my lineage's history.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So we can maybe touch upon that at some point. But I had a thought to myself. I said, I want to keep doing this type of work. And how can I get closer to human suffering live time?
Okay.
And I thought to myself, policing's going to allow that, right?
Right.
There's an
Yeah.
emergency, they call for help, and we're going to go. We're going live into human suffering,
Yeah.
right? Human danger, interpersonal issues, live, right?
Yeah.
So I had that thought at that time, and I carried that with me. So I call the era that we're talking about my 20s,
Okay.
and I came into policing in my 30s after
Right.
my wife got sick of me whining about missing my opportunity and signing me up for the
Okay.
police exam. You
Just
know?
go and do it. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Shut up and do it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I come into policing in my 30s, and that's where some very interesting things happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess you made this observation before, but if you've got someone going into the cadet school or training school and having 6 months training, go straight out on the street, probably 18, 19, 20. You've got you as a 30-year-old who's already got multiple years experience, in that kind of managing potential conflict situations, you know.
Absolutely. And you know
So
what
you've
else I
got a
had?
different perspective on it.
Right. I
You've
already
got, in a way, you've got skills. You're not really afraid of that
That's right.
situation. You know how to diffuse it a little bit. You can read the signs in people and
That's right.
not, because I guess this touches on quite a lot of, really the nexus of what we're talking about is how do the police on the street act in situations where they're dealing with some quite hostile people and keep their heads when all about them are losing theirs, right?
Nicely said. I can label some of this stuff as well, right? So I had these ideas around people who use substances are not evil, they're not broken, right? They're not criminals, right?
Yeah.
I also had in me harm reduction without even having that title, having that
Yeah.
word, right? Because I was there to not only protect the interests of the club owners, I was there to protect the interest of the club culture. I was there to
Okay.
protect the interest of the city rules and regulations.
Yeah.
But Chris, one more thing. I was there to protect the people that were there to have a good time.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, think
That's
about that, right? Aren't aren't
not all
police?
nightclub bouncers that I've met have made me feel like that. So I'm glad that there are people like you who are
Yeah.
doing that. So how did that translate into what you did when you actually went and did your policing, and how did that? I think you ended up with a kind of slightly new kind of mission or new way of doing things. Is that right?
Oh yeah, yeah, I did. So I bring all this stuff into policing. I come into policing on the older side, right, in my 30s, and I start working patrol. And what I realized, Chris, is that there's a moral imperative hidden in the police computer systems,
Okay.
and I can tell you what I mean by that. Every police department knows who's struggling,
Okay.
and outside of traditional policing, every police department is not doing something progressive.
Right.
I can
Yeah.
tell you that. Okay.
Yeah.
And what I ended up realizing is that we have an opportunity if we look at the police data set with a different heart and mindset.
Okay. So you
Yeah,
look at it as a cry for help rather than a need for criminalization.
you have it. You have it. And I view it as an opportunity to find and connect with people.
Okay, and so that's the start point. So where you are now is a bigger offering than that. But maybe before we move on, because I'm conscious of the time, before we move on to the kind of next phase, obviously what we're talking about here, and we touched on earlier, is the impact of accumulated job trauma and stress on police mental health and culture, and then ultimately behaviour. Now, before you had your kind of moment around MDMA therapy, etc., what was your awareness and an experience of what you saw about how that actually played out on the streets and with your colleagues and even yourself?
Yeah. So what ends up happening is the police officers end up helping with a particular situation over and over and over again. And what I mean
Yeah,
by that is they're running into people at their worst possible moment
yeah,
for 40, 50, 60 hours a week. That is
yeah,
actually the job.
yeah,
So you end up having a narrowing of perspective related to the work. You
yeah,
start thinking the entire world is like the perception that you have now created because of the work that you do,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
this narrowing happens. Not only does that happen in your mind, but that happens in your heart as well,
Okay,
right? Now, police officers also are continually going to help with critical incidents,
yeah,
okay? That's the job.
yeah,
Critical incidents load up in your nervous system.
yeah.
They start changing you. They start changing you physically,
Changing your
mentally,
physiology.
emotionally, spiritually. Yes, yes, over time. And it's detrimental to police psychology. It's detrimental to police soul.
So do you think that then actually leads to someone? So you've got this kind of two-phase thing going on, and I guess there's some blurring of the lines between it. So you've got those repeated call-outs where you have that kind of, I guess, a sense of hopelessness. So you necessarily close off because you feel you can't help those people, or you just start to become numb to it. I guess to protect yourself in a way from, but then you've also got those kind of real adrenaline based instances where you yourself might feel a risk or a threat of for your own safety.
Absolutely. So that becomes the normal, right? So, Chris, I've said this before. Like every officer that gets up to get ready for their shift, they start already releasing a little bit of adrenaline and cortisol into their system. It's
Yeah,
actually normal. It's actually protective, right?
yeah,
So you go from baseline green, you start entering yellow, so
yeah,
that you're ready for the
yeah,
red, right? Now, 1 week of that, fine. 1 month of that, fine.
Yeah.
A year, okay. 40, the person's changing. The
Yeah.
job and the work and carrying the dark underbelly of human suffering is
Yeah.
destroying the officer.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
just as the nature of their job. And so what you see is, I guess, some of that gets taken home or taken outside, or even taken back onto the streets, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, an example of that
Or onto
is
the self, the
onto the
harmful
self,
self.
for
Yeah.
sure, right? So if you use the metaphor of those gas tanks, the resiliency tanks, they end up getting diminished and diminished and diminished, and people are running on empty, right? And this increases risk not only for the officer but for the civilian as
Yeah.
well as the society and the community.
Yeah. Especially when someone's got a gun in their belt, right?
That's right.
So, okay, so you've been working to try and change policing, but you're conscious that there's still a problem within as the nature of the job in terms of what it does to the people. So, what's the story with how you ended up coming across MDMA therapy? How did that play out?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of interlinks here and stuff.
Yes.
So I ran into a police chief that um, was open to hearing outside of the box ideas.
Okay.
And I think he noticed something about me, and he said, "You know what? Um, I'm gonna let you go to the International Association of Police Chiefs conference every year.
Yeah.
Um, what I want you to do is take all the psychology track classes, and
Yeah.
learn, and bring it back. Let's debrief. Let's use the information to make things better." So
Okay.
he started taking me to the really big, I mean,
And that's
worldwide,
international. So that's police chiefs from all over the world, right?
all over the world. It's a huge, huge, huge conference. It's the pinnacle conference for policing every year.
Yeah.
And so one of the years, this was a few years back, I ended up going on my own because he wasn't able to attend. But the conference was in Florida that year, and um, on the agenda was Dr. Rick Doblin presenting the results of phase 2 clinical trials related to MDMA assisted psychotherapy for treatment resistant severe PTSD.
And so you're already a little bit intrigued, but I understand there was another attraction on the bill as right that you had to choose between, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so I'd like to blow up a little bit. I was extremely intrigued. I couldn't believe it. And then as I was walking to the room, there was an announcement made that Donald Trump was going to be at the conference. They happened to put him right at the spot, right at the time when Rick was going to present. And this is legit. I was on the second floor of this gigantic conference hall, and I had to choose going to right to see Donald Trump or going left and seeing Rick Doblin, and I went left. I
Well,
went
we
just
thank you. We thank you for that decision, Sarko,
yeah,
because it's a very fateful decision.
yeah, I
So,
think it was beyond me, but
yeah, what was it like So, what was it like? What did you hear in the session with Rick Doblin? And there was quite a difference in the crowds as well, I guess, in terms of the number of people who were either side. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it's easy to imagine. Everybody went to see Trump, so they had put Rick into a very big room. He was there with the other presenters, thinking there was going to be interest, rightfully so.
Yeah.
But Trump trumped that, right?
Yeah.
Right. So this room had about 15 people in it, and I was one of them. I sat in the front row like I usually do when I'm interested in something. And before they were done, I was trembling with excitement. And I'll tell you why. This is what I remember from that. 67% of the participants in the phase 2 trial that they were sharing had their PTSD go into remission.
Yeah.
Not only was it remission, but it was sustained remission.
And that's a remarkable effect size for any therapeutic intervention, right? There's really very few therapies that have any kind of effect, and this is with a hard to treat population as well that have had many other therapeutic attempts at treatments right before they can even get to that.
That's right. I couldn't say that any better. That's true. Right. But also pairing a Schedule One substance with psychotherapy,
Yeah,
genius, and then
yeah,
showing the legitimate Western science required data.
yeah, yeah. So how do you? So I guess maybe when you saw it on the bill, but presumably your early experiences in the nightclubs when you saw the impact that ecstasy had on people, and you then saw the results, it was like it just felt. Did it feel like an aha moment? Like, yes, of course.
Oh, it was an aha moment. Yeah, I had it in my body. I was shaking. So when everything ended, that aha moment, like you said, Chris, I jumped on stage. I beelined it straight to Rick, put my hand out, introduced myself, and I said, I need to know how I'm helping with this. And after he asked me a couple of questions, I saw something happen when I told him that I'm a police officer and a psychotherapist.
I bet. Yeah, I bet. I bet he
Right?
could believe his luck.
Right? He said, well, the best way to help Sarko is to become an MDMA assisted psychotherapist. Here's my card.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And that then led to you. Well, you actually led to you being filmed having having an
It did.
MDMA experience, right? But which anybody who's seen the Michael Pollan documentary would have noticed. But you've lost the beard since then. But so what was it like then? Actually having MDMA therapeutically. I mean, there'll probably be people in the room who have done MDMA kind of recreationally, and they might wonder what a therapy with MDMA is like. I mean, I guess maybe it's like sitting in the chill out room, talking to a stranger, telling them your deepest secrets, but with a bit more intention and with some very skilled therapists, and maybe without someone passing a joint halfway through.
Absolutely. I can speak to that. And I have, like you just said, it was filmed, right? My session was filmed and very interesting. The federal government allowed 120 people for this particular research protocol to have access. They are called healthy normals, right? It was just being done in people that
Yeah,
didn't have a diagnostic label of a challenge, a mental health challenge. And when I was granted that permission, when I had access in that level, documentarians thought that it would be important to capture that footage. That got into How to Change Your Mind, the Michael
yeah,
Pollan documentary. So you bring up some really valid points, right? So I was able to experience pharmaceutical grade MDMA paired with um, masterly
yeah,
psychotherapy, right? The inner directive, the non-directive MAPS approach
yeah,
with Michael and Annie Mithofer
yeah,
as my caretakers, as my guides, as the people holding space for me.
yeah,
So that was 8 hours of that type of psychotherapy,
yeah.
roughly speaking on the time range, um, enhanced by MDMA. Chris, it was magical.
Right. Yeah,
That's the word that I come up with when I tell you, Chris, I was immediately enveloped in love, and I was able to utilize gratitude to
yeah,
touch upon some very serious topics
yeah.
for that length of time. It's not an exaggeration. It was a sacred experience for me.
And these are things which you don't think you've been able to access without the MDMA, or would have been difficult to access without the MDMA. Would that be fair to say?
So it would be longer. Yeah,
So
it
it would
would be
take longer.
longer. So
Okay.
difficult is right. Difficult is right. Doable, yes. Longer comes to
Yeah.
mind. I didn't know I was going to go into transgenerational trauma the way I did.
Okay.
I didn't realize that my entire life is and was built through my people's traumatic history.
And that is.
It was a eye opening, soul opening, heart opening. The trauma is the Armenian people's genocide by the Turks.
Yeah.
1915 genocide. They got 75% of the Armenian native population.
That's
They
really
killed.
talks
They
about.
killed
Yeah.
them. Yeah,
Horrendous. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so much of my life is built through that. Chris, when
So you
let me
mentioned
give you a
about
solid
diffusing
example.
conflict, and it's almost like you just spend your life trying to stop that kind of stuff happening, right?
Exactly. And how could I do that? I guess with a little bit of wisdom connected to it is I end up being a helper with a gun.
Yeah.
I got my gun on my hip. I wonder why, right?
Yeah.
But I'm stepping in between people and groups that are trying to harm themselves, and I'm trying to. We don't need to be doing
So
this.
you've already
I mean,
got a
where am I
mindset of
really?
trying to achieve peace. Yeah. So So I mean, if this is too personal, please do say. But so you weren't necessarily dealing with the kind of visceral, traumatic memories that maybe some police officers would have to deal with they need to come out in this kind of therapy. But you could see that actually this would work for that as kind of thing as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So if you take it like this, Chris, the way you said it, visceral, I like that, right? The police officer ends up loading with immediate tangible traumas, and they start building their life through those traumas in the here and now
Yeah.
rapidly. Mine was a transgenerational type thing that was in my
Okay.
genetics, right?
Yeah.
And in my youth, I had about 10 years of nightmares where that information was coming to me as a kid. Can you
It's a
imagine this?
fascinating area that how does but with growing evidence, and probably that's a subject for another discussion. So you I mean there were a couple of things that you said in the Netflix, and actually I've heard you mention. So you said that the MDMA made you be able to experience sadness without being sad. Is that kind of
Yeah, yeah. MDMA tempers the amygdala down,
yeah
and the amygdala houses all those emotions, right? Those overwhelming emotions, right? So you can remember them and build your life and making sure that you don't make a mistake and have something tragic happen again.
yeah
It tempers the amygdala down. So I was able to go into sadness without becoming overwhelmed by sadness, without becoming the sadness, right?
yeah
Yeah, that's
yeah? So
exactly
you
right.
just don't. So you, if trauma is characterized by overwhelm, effectively it is overwhelm. You could kind of experience those overwhelming experiences without that overwhelm, which
Yes.
is why you could bring them forward. Okay, so you've done the therapy now. You've done the training. So we haven't got long left in half an hour. So obviously come out of that thinking, right, this is going to be revolutionary. I guess you can see how it's going to help. So what do you did that give you more motivation to kind of pursue, expanding the work that you were doing with the team you were doing?
It did.
Um,
Yeah, it did. It did. Chris, um, this particular substance is a Schedule One substance, right? And there's a number of other substances on there that, I mean, we're talking about plants, we're talking about
yeah,
cacti, we're talking about fungi, animal secretions, right? We're talking about substances that do not have a typical addiction profile,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
what are we doing, right? What are we doing with this thing called the war on drugs, right? We're sending men and women in to a battlefield, right?
yeah,
We're causing trauma.
yeah.
We're
On both
creating
sides, right? Yeah,
on both sides, right? We're creating trauma in the community where our police officers are absorbing trauma into their nervous systems. For what?
yeah,
For what?
yeah. No, and that's so true. So what I want to really kind of get to in the last sort of couple of minutes is so if MDMA therapy 2024 probably. I mean that's fairly set now, isn't it? I mean the application map's going to make the application at the end of 2023. We've already been working with the FDA, so you know you'd expect 2024 is going to be available. So understanding that even though available, how as a police officer, serving police officer, you might actually access that. That's a bit of an open question, right?
That
Well, it's not
is,
an
and
open
it's something
question.
I'm
It's
deep.
it's a no.
It's a no, right? Yeah, exactly, Chris. And I can talk to that a little bit here. We're going to have a problem. We're going to have an access problem, right? Because let me just put this out there. Uh, Police officers, right, can't go get a diagnostic label.
Yeah.
They can't. And you need a diagnostic label to access these substances in the medical pathway,
So
right?
yeah.
So we're not going to be accessing this at the same pace and at the same time frame as civilians.
So basically, you have to get a diagnosis of PTSD. So you'll be able to, you'll be relieved your PTSD diagnosis, but you won't be a serving police officer anymore. That's essentially the model
That
if it isn't changed. So what would be your ideal alternative to that then?
My ideal would be self care access for anybody who needs it in law enforcement. And
Okay.
I care about access for civilians as well, right? But
Yeah.
I'm talking about my brothers and sisters in law enforcement. And I got to tell you, Chris, this isn't a radical concept. And I'll give you an example right from the States. Okay. Oregon, the mighty state of Oregon has decided to create healing centers
Yeah.
where people are going to be able to access psilocybin, which is a Schedule 1 substance, for self-care.
And will any idea whether the Oregon State Police or City Police will actually be able to go along themselves, or?
That's going to be a problem. There's barriers there, right? There's
Yeah.
rules and regulations. Schedule 1 on the federal level leads all the way down to rules and regulations within a police department that say you can't touch this stuff.
So you're advocating that actually a police personnel should be able to put their hand up, maybe in consultation with their leader, to say, hey, I think I'm struggling here, or I'm kind of reached a tipping point, or I'm worried that it's going to get worse. Can I go and get some self care? And they'll be supportive into that.
I felt that in my bones. That is exactly what I'm saying, Chris. We need our law enforcement to be able to get whatever help they need to reach retirement well, period. In the story. They don't need, they shouldn't have the work break them before they have access to a medicine.
It's a known occupational hazard, right? I mean, it's just, if you were doing a risk assessment, you'd have to acknowledge that it's a risk and put in a suitable mitigation, but doesn't seem to be any mitigation. But now we do have an option, so it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. So just before we close off, because we've gone a little bit over time, because, me and you could talk for hours on this topic. If you had to say something to, police leaders or police or even and policymakers over in the UK, what would your message to them be about these therapies? Maybe people who are maybe a little bit skeptical or worried. What would your message be?
I would suggest to them, and I would humbly suggest to them, because there's people with a lot more experience and a huger and a different knowledge base than me out there. I would say, come, sit around the table, talk to the people that are pushing this research forward. Recognize the fact that a lot of these substances on Schedule 1 are already recognized as medicines. They're already recognized as sacred sacraments. And ask yourself, are we doing the best we could be doing to protect our people, all of our people? Ask yourself that, and then come, sit around the table, talk, break bread.
That's really a good thing. Nice thoughts to end on, Sarko. So thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate that. And hopefully, we've talked about this before, but maybe we'll get you over here in person at some point. We'll be able to really dive into these in detail, and you can come and talk to us, some of our serving police and police leaders over here, and start to persuade them that there's some hope out there. So,
Chris, I would love that. I always enjoy talking with you, man. And thank you for the professional and caring work that you do. Yeah.
Thanks again.